I've never been to Mississippi before, so this is something new for me. And it feels kind of exotic, actually, being Norwegian, walking around in the South States. Walking the streets of New York, which I've done several times, you always meet fellow Norwegians, and even friends, actually, on the streets. I don't think I'll drop into so many Norwegians actually walking the streets of Oxford. Working with distribution, as we do, our business is 100% reliant on the printed magazine and the sales of that. And so it's a bit frustrating, actually, seeing the total shift the last 5 years of both money and focus toward the digital part of the business, because we are not making any money out of that. This will partly actually be a geographic lesson, as well as talking about the Norwegian magazine market, because I don't know, how many of you have ever been to Norway? Wow, it's not bad. And then how many know actually where Norway is placed on the map? a bit more. So we'll try actually to give you also some demographic and geographical news about Norway, so you know what to expect from our market. And since this is kind of a place of higher education, of course there's going to be a quiz at the end. And I brought with me all the way from Norway a chocolate bar. So the one that makes the quiz, it's only going to be one question, will get the chocolate. I'm kind of leaning to more of my script, because it's English is not my first language. It's Norwegian, of course, and it feels kind of, I don't know if you've seen the quote from Winnie the Pooh, that he says that it sounded so smart in my head, but something happened on the way out. Which is also quite, try to stay on script instead of walking around and do a lot of other things. Let's see if I can get this one to work. This is Norway. A tiny little country up there. Actually, it's not so small. We'll come back to that. I also brought with me a video, so you can understand a bit more about our culture and how we Norwegians act. And I will say before we start this video, there's one key point to it. Remember irony. Oops. I have my tech personnel with me as well, so we'll get everything.
This is planet Earth, and this is Norway. Many people think that Norway is the capital of Sweden. So if you think so right now, you are wrong. Since ancient time, Norway has survived on fish, potatoes, rocks, and plundering. And then in the 1960s, we invented the oil. We gave up rocks and plundering, but we still like fish and potatoes. The invention of oil has in many ways laid the foundation of today's society, where we are born with skis on our feet. Even before we learned how to walk or even stand, we got dragged into a big ski called a pulk. But as soon as they learn how to stand on their own feet, they are forced to love skiing. During these ski trips, they also learn how to love the lunch packet. The lunch packet's most popular containment is a frozen piece of bread with a slice of yellow cheese on it. But soon enough, we learn how easy it is to get something else. Bedtime stories are a big thing in Norway. They mainly evolve around scary creatures like trolls and a guy called Askeladden. And these stories are the main reason why the children are afraid of the dark. Even though we Norwegians got extremely wealthy from inventing the oil, we keep forgetting to buy more kindergartens. So socializing is a rare expense for some kids. But what we do buy a lot of are schools. We start school at the age of 6 and graduate after we learned that Norway is not the capital of Sweden and the Norwegian special letters and lunch packet with the frozen bread and the cheese is still popular here. 2 weeks before the final exams and graduation, the grad students put on red and blue overalls. Then we drink and drive red and blue cars, sometimes also buses, while not doing our homework. The 17th of May is the last day of celebration, and this also happens to be our day of independence. On this day we celebrate our liberty, our fish and potatoes and oil. We have flags and eat Norwegian traditional food like hot dog. Kids and grown-ups also wear a traditional dress made from wool called a bunad. It itches terribly, is way too warm and makes you look fat. But that doesn't stop us from smiling and dancing and kicking hats off sticks, doing traditional folk dances. After graduation from high school, we leave our moms and her dinners. We migrate to bigger cities and discover dinners that are much more enjoyable than mom's fish and potatoes. But we still like fish and potatoes. After moving to bigger cities, we find a job or a book to read and go out 2 days per week. We mingle and have sex. Actually, statistically speaking, we are at the top of the scale when it comes to one-night stands. In Norway, also referred to as simple, easy enjoyment. Then we have babies and start a family. Our children are born with skis on their feet and then put them in pulks and make them go skiing. Make lunch packets, scare them with stories about trolls, make them wear clothes that itches and tell them to kick hats, give them money so they can drink and drive and not read, so that they can repeat their cycles over and again. And they say now, hey, welcome to Norway.
So hopefully now you understand more who we are, and you'll excuse us later on when they go to the Delta. If you talk more specific about Norway, it's a part of Scandinavia, which consists of 3 countries. So it's Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. Norway is actually, even though it looks quite small on the map, it's a rather large country, 385,000 square kilometers. If you look into Great Britain, that's actually much smaller, only 230,000 square kilometers. We have a population of 5.1 million people. If you moved everyone from Norway to New York, you can fill half of Manhattan. That's the size. The capital is Oslo, 600,000 inhabitants, borders together with Sweden, Russia, Finland, and Denmark. And we have a gross domestic product of over $100,000, which is actually twice as big as the US. So it's a very rich country as well. If you take the country from the bottom and to the top, you can place it from New York to LA. That's kind of the length of the country. Or to put it another way, if you put your finger in Oslo, which is not actually further down, the furthest down in the south, and turn the country around, it ends up in Rome. So you can also consider actually doing the distribution part in a country like this with 5 million people and 3 days drive by a truck to get your magazine from one end of the country to the other. It's quite expensive. If you have a little look at the markets in Norway for single copy sales, it's roughly 2.5 billion Norwegian kroners of the counter business, which equals $415 million. Divided between 2 distributors, it's Interpress, which is us, which have 20% of the market, and it's a company called Bladsentralen, which has about 80% of the market. I'll come back and explain a bit more of the different companies. If you look population-wise, the Norwegian market is 1.5% of the total market in the US. So it's a small market. If you look on the average pricing of a magazine, we've been told earlier today that the average price for an American magazine is between $4 and $5. In Norway, the average price is over $10 for a magazine. So it's a high-cost good, actually, when you go to buy a magazine in Norway. If you look at the different companies, Interpress, which is the one we are coming from, is owned by something called Reitan Convenience. Reitan Convenience is actually the 2nd largest convenience chain in Europe, owned totally from Norway. And in Norway, the largest part of that chain is called Norway, which has about 365 kiosks. It's established in 1894, so it's actually 120 years old this year. It was started by a man who got the rights to build small kiosks around the railway in the eastern and southern part of Europe. No, sorry, Norway, to distribute magazine and papers. We distribute approximately 100 Norwegian titles and 1,500 international titles, then mainly Swedish, Danish, UK, US, and German title. And we have approximately 2,000 customers which we distribute magazines to. I brought with me a little video as well, so you can see something about Norway, which is the main driver of magazines in Norway, and especially then special interest in international magazines.
It wasn't easy, but nothing is. No. When I feel heavy metal, and I feel that I need when I lie and I'm easy all of the time, but I'm never sure why I need you. Things I need ya. Down when I was young. It's not my problem. It's not my problem. When I feel heavy metal, and I feel that I need when I lie and I'm easy all of the time, but I'm never sure why I need you.
Our competitor Bladcentralen is not owned by a convenience chain, but it's owned by the 4 largest magazine publishers in Norway. They're also owned actually by the 4 largest book distributors or book publishers in Norway. So they also distribute books, as do we. Established in 1999, distributes only Norwegian magazines that are made by their owners. Have approximately 100 magazines, and as you can see, have a lot more customers than we do, close to 6,000 actually. Mostly weeklies is what they are selling, and they have few special interest magazines, but they have some. If you see on the print market for 2013, approximately 230 local or domestic newspapers, 200 domestic magazine titles, and approximately 1,500 international magazine titles. The largest categories are, by far, as you can see, women. But there's also a very open category, which brings it from teens and to the magazine called Us Over 60. So it's a very wide category. Market down close with 7% compared to 2012. The one thing that's been actually was strange in the Norwegian market last year was that international magazines were stable. They actually had went down by 0.2% or something like that. So the whole downfall of the market came from the local or the domestic magazines. If you look into books in Norway to compare something when it comes to reading, you will actually see that the book selling in Norway is very stable and has been for many years. And I think it partly comes because the publishers have made it incredibly hard for the customers to buy digital copies of the books. Norway, a country of 5 million people, have 3 or 4 different ways to get their books, meaning you have to have 3 different tablets to be able to reach all of them. So then you don't go in buy one, because then you can get the books from one publisher and not the other. Meaning that actually in Norway, the digital part of the book industry, the revenue is 2% or lower than 2%, while here in the US it's over 30%. So they managed to keep the people going buying the printed books. And you can say if that is good or not, if the customers is going to get tired, how many customers go instead and buying books from Amazon in the US and the UK instead. We don't know, but they managed actually to keep the book sales up. If you also look further onto the market, the number of domestic magazine titles has tripled since 1990 in Norway, and it doubled since 2000, meaning there are more and more titles being brought to market, or at least it was. While the total circulation is the same today as it was in 1990. You have, of course, had some ups and downs during that course, but meaning that even though you now have 3 times as many titles, you're not selling any more copies. There's been a slight decrease in number of titles the last 2 years, because we see that everything that's closed down is not actually something new coming in. And we see also that the circulation numbers is down 30% for the 10 largest titles over the last 5 years. So it's the big weeklies, I expect that's the same as here in the US are taking the highest hit actually on the downfall. Last year, there was only one magazine cluster or category that showed growth from 2012 to 2013, and that was the one called Food, Health, and Hobby, where you had a circulation up by 23%. All the others went down, and as you can see here, women down by almost 6, men down by 12, and gossip also down by almost 9%. So far this year, it seems now that the market for magazines is down close to 10% by the first 7 months of 2040. So the decline is actually coming now faster and faster than it has been for the last 2-3 years. The biggest change from 2013 is also that the international magazines has the same decline as the domestic magazines. And also we see now that there is actually not one category or one cluster of magazines that are showing growth. They're all falling all across the board. As far as we have been able to look into the market and see why are things happening in the market as it is, we don't think actually that it is the digital part that are stealing a lot of consumers from the print. What we see is that the in-store focus is actually what making the highest drop as we see it. We have 2 chains in Norway driving the international magazine sales, which is Norway and SSP. And what we see there is that it's dropping in a number of titles which are taken into the store. They have a smaller customer base. Convenience in Norway is losing customers every year. Since kind of like the recession, which we actually never had in Norway in 2008, we've seen a decline of 6% per year of customers coming into the convenience stores and rather going to the supermarket stores and buying the stuff there. And we also see that it's been a drop in the spread of the assortment outlets. So you're getting less and less space as well. And also we see that it's not longer a high interest occupancy to be a store manager. So kind of like the skills and whatever drives the people coming in there is no longer that they have a keen interest for magazines, which used to be the case for these stores. Meaning also that the focus they have on magazine in-store is going less and less. And the focus on food and beverage is higher again. If you have a picture which comes later, we can see something happening in the stores. But just to give you some overview as well, because What is important is that instead of focusing everything on the digital part, which we feel also the publisher of magazines in Norway are doing, and therefore we also lose kind of like the traffic into the stores. We see the newspapers have had even further losses over the last years, but they're starting to do something with it. They're starting to focusing back on the print again. The largest newspaper in Norway is called VG, and they actually, in Norway, giving away one car each month to their print copy customers. So if you go to the store and you buy a paper there, you are able to be part of a contest to win a car. And they give one every month. If that alone as what kind of like decreasing the fall in their numbers, I don't know, but they have at least have started to do something else than just looking to the digital part. We also had a look into the money following print, meaning marketing. In 1997, the total marketing revenue for all media in Norway were 4.5 billion Norwegian kroners. The printed media had 2.7 billion of that revenue, 60%. If you go to 2013, the total marketing revenue for all medias were 9 billion, up with 100% since 1997. But then looking into the printed media part, it was only 1.8 billion. So that revenue, it was 20%. And also you can see that even though we haven't had, as we talked, any recession in Norway, there's not been one bank closed in Norway the last 10 years. The property prices since 2008 to 2013 has gone up by almost 10%. So it's kind of like a very different landscape than most other countries. And of course, it is because the economy, the oil and everything, which is driving the Norwegian economy. But even though people have started looking more into what they're doing, you see the media part didn't drop either on the marketing. It's been the same, it's been stable, and now it's started going up again. It never dropped, as it's done many other places. But the willingness to use marketing on the printed media has, as you can see, dropped significantly the last 15 years. So what you can say, when we talk about recession in Norway, we're actually talking about the psychological recession, because what it made when you see everything happens abroad, people started thinking what they should do with the money. More people started putting the money in the banks instead of using it. So we kind of had some kind of recession there, but it was more that they started thinking what using the money for instead of that they actually were in danger of not having money. Top 10 magazines. Since 2008, the workload circulation of the top 10 magazines in Norway has dropped by 28%. If you look at the number 1 magazine, it's dropped by 17%, and number 10 with 37%. So you can see, as we saw earlier as well, it's the top magazines, especially the weeklies on gossip and towards women, which are dropping heavily. If you look towards the future, we're all talking about the digital will kill the print. If you look back to the digital revolution, which for me is actually happening quite a long time ago, in 1839, the first telegraph was invented, or the first what should you call it, telegraph that were making money, commercialized telegraph was made. And in 1858, you had the first line crossing the Atlantic, meaning you actually skipped 10 days of information. You had the steamboat going over, so it took you 10 days to bring a letter from Europe to the US. And suddenly it took only a couple of minutes. But even though still, 150 years later, we're still sending letters. I was sending postcards home to my grandmother as late as yesterday. So it's kind of like it still functions. For Norway, the future, as we're told, it's a small market, meaning there are no exports possibilities for Norwegian market for Norwegian papers. Who would like to read a Norwegian paper on Norwegian in any other country than Norway? So kind of like you're stuck to that market. And also the development cost you do when you bring in digital into it is huge for that small market. It's been a lot of focus, as we're told, on the digital, meaning the money or the revenue from the publishers has gone to building on the digital. And we see that the print now is more and more actually hurting because they're not putting any money into that. In Norway, we are very early adapters on new technology. You can see, for example, the installed base of PlayStation 2 in Norway before PlayStation 3 arrived was the highest in the world. It was also the cheapest place actually to buy a PlayStation 2, much cheaper than going to the US. And we also very fast rejectors of old technology. When the flat screen TVs came out, you can see in all the outlets which are selling technology products, they also have to take returns on the old ones. There were hundreds and hundreds of TVs standing outside of all of them. Not very old, but it wasn't the newest technology. The prognosis we see shows a steady decline of average of 5% every year forward for the magazine or the printed magazines in Norway. But I don't think that the biggest challenge is print versus digital. It's actually to get our young ones starting reading instead of doing everything else. And I think that's where the challenge is. And if publishers don't want to put money into bringing those people on board reading, being digital, being printed or whatever, that's where we're losing the battle actually. I brought with me also, before we totally end and we have the quiz, a small video showing that we've been struggling with printed media. That it's not new. This is a Norwegian sketch, but for you, we've texted it so you can understand what you actually say.
Broder Ansgar?
Ja.
Det er deg, ja?
Ja.
Så bra, ok.
Ja, hei du.
Nå fatter jeg det.
Hei du. Ja.
Ja, hva gjelder det?
Ja, det er denne her. Ja, vil du sitte?
Takk.
Ja.
Jaha.
Ja, så jeg har ikke fått gjort noen ting hele formiddagen.
Ok, nei, jeg beklager at det tar tid. Altså, skjønner vi holder på å legge om til et helt nytt system, og da skal alle ha hjelp på en gang. Vet du.
Ja.
Så du kommer ikke inn i den, eller?
Nei, den bare ligger der.
Ok, har du forsøkt å åpne den?
Ja, åpne den, altså hvis det hadde vært så enkelt, så hadde jeg jo ikke tilkalt helpdesk, hadde jeg vel?
Nei, det er sant.
Nei. Vil du ha en kopp og en vann?
Nei, da, det skal være fort gjort. Dette
Ja.
skal vi se. Du bare gjør der. Sånn.
Ja.
Da er du i gang.
Ja, altså så langt kom jeg også.
Ok.
Ikke sant? Men så stoppet det opp, og så var jeg redd for at noe av teksten skulle forsvinne, så jeg turte ikke å gå videre.
Åja, ok. Nei, men du skjønner at inni her så ligger det kanskje flere hundre sider med lagret tekst. Så for å komme videre så tar du tak i et ark på den måten her, og så liksom blar du over på neste side sånn. Da fortsetter teksten der.
Jeg blar, altså.
Du blar, ja.
Men når jeg skal tilbake, da?
Ja, da bare blar du tilbake igjen. Tar tak der, og så gjør du sånn. Der, så er du tilbake til den teksten du hadde i stad. Ikke noe
Ok, så den
forandret.
slutter der,
Ja.
og så fortsetter den der, ja. Ok, men når jeg skal avslutte for dagen, hva gjør jeg da?
Da bare slår du sammen permene
Ja?
på den måten der. Sånn. Da er den lukket, da ligger alt lagret inni der.
Altså, jeg risikerer ikke å miste noe av teksten her nå,
Nei,
altså.
alt ligger lagret inni her nå.
Ja.
Da må du i tilfelle sette fyr på hele greia. Det er kanskje lite sannsynlig. Så.
Ja, ok. Nei, men for det er noe med det at ikke sant, når du har holdt på med skriftruller,
Ja.
så tar det litt grann tid å konvertere til å bla i en bøk.
Ja.
Ja, whatever.
Det er greit.
Ja, flott. Ja, men du, en ting før du går. Jeg må bare gå gjennom en gang til. Altså, jeg åpner
Ja.
sånn,
Ja, riktig.
og så, hva har du kalt det?
Blar.
Jeg blar,
Ja, bla videre.
blar frem og tilbake.
Ja.
Og når,
Teksten ligger der hele tiden.
ja. Og når jeg er ferdig, så bare lukker jeg den.
Ja, riktig.
Flott.
Fint det.
Kjempefint.
Ja, flott det.
Ja, men du, vent, ikke sant? Nå er den sånn igjen, nå får jeg ikke åpnet den.
Ja, det er fra feil side. Du må åpne fra andre siden.
Så det er ikke likegyldig, det,
Nei,
altså?
du må åpne fra den siden der. Sånn. Der. Der er den åpen.
Ja vel.
Har du
Ok.
lest manualen, eller?
Manualen?
Jeg skal følge med som manual og som brukerveiledning. Det er sikkert den der. Der, vet du.
Å ja,
I
den, ja.
står alt sammen.
Ja, men ikke sant, der har du samme problemet. Får den ikke opp. Åpnet den.
Ok, det skulle vi kanskje ha tenkt på.
Thank you. And then to the quiz. What kind of food does we Norwegian like to eat? Man with the white shirt. Thank you very much.